Hey guys, this is Alen and Leon, and welcome to Seize the Moment Podcast, episode 10. And today we're going to talk to you about love and dating.
Oh, yeah.
And by the way, before we start, just want to say you can follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Instagram and at Seize_podcast on Twitter. Also visit our channel on YouTube, Seize the Moment Podcast, and hit the bell. Yeah, it's to receive notifications every time we do an episode.
Yeah.
So, we're going to talk about love and dating.
Oh my god, this episode, man.
So, you were telling me you were reading an article earlier today.
So there was this really good article. I don't remember exactly the author's name, but it was on Vice It was from Vice magazine. So the article is essentially about how kind of people use social media, and in particular the tools that social media offers, in order to kind of sort of, I guess the word is foster intimacy, or, you know, kind of obviously at the other end of the spectrum, some people can even view it as sort of foster flirting or gameplay. But the point is, it's so interesting kind of, and then, you know, you and I and all of us were having this conversation earlier about how easy it is for us to use kind of social media, not only obviously to manipulate people or to sort of get what we want, but to also even show our attraction to one another.
So I'll tell you this, as an Instagram user myself, I know a little bit about this, just a little bit. I'm not like an expert in wooing and all this kind of stuff. I may be a woo-woo kind of an expert.
Not that woo.
But not that kind of woo.
Yeah.
But I'll say this. Whenever you do set up like an Instagram story, right, and you have somebody following you, say it's like, for me in my case, it would be some kind of girl following my page. So every time I post a story, right, it's a very low investment. She may view the story, see what's going on in my life, and it's kind of like an indirect way of showing what's going on without putting too much pressure or asking the girl to kind of invest. Yeah. So she could just easily click, see what's going on with you, and then maybe, develop some kind of interest based on that. Maybe after a little bit you can direct message her, she can direct message you, kind of get going from there. Right. But this is has been talked about probably ad nauseum, and ad infinitum, like Latin. No, but it seems like what happened? What happens to the old way of doing things? You know, you just kind of either go to a bar, you go to a library, you're just walking outside, and you could meet somebody that way. But now the game's kind of changed a little bit.
Yeah. And interestingly, right, so I mean, technically speaking, it's not even that people aren't meeting that way anymore. It's just that it's that plus social media now. So it's like they'll meet someone, they'll give them their Instagram handle or maybe their Twitter or whatever, and then they'll kind of go back and forth. And again, not necessarily saying that it's a game, right? Because sometimes people legitimately do it because they think like that's like the best way to flirt. But that's kind of what they do. You'll meet someone at a bar, at a club, and you'll be like, hey, you know, let me get your Instagram, or they'll ask you for their Instagram. And then all of a sudden, you're going back and forth looking through each other's stories.
So you see, that's the new thing.
Yeah.
You still can do it the old way. I actually prefer to do it the old way. I'm really old-fashioned. This is going to be bad. I'm going to date myself right now. I actually asked for their Facebook.
Oh. This is before or after their MySpace?
I also get their MySpace.
Oh, good.
But I make sure, at first, to be cool, I ask for their Facebook.
That's good.
No, but for real, I do that. Yeah. I also do the Instagram, but I'll be honest with you, like I'm not on my personal Instagram. I'm not so active. Yeah. I have gotten one. I've been told it's a good idea. You should, if you are in the you're let's say you're dating, you're kind of living the modern life. Let's say you live in a city or something like that. Right. I do think that there is a use to having an Instagram and posting what you do and all that. It's just kind of a new socialized thing to do, so it kind of gives you like a social proof by even having one.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. So how come you go for the Facebook and don't ask for their number?
I used to ask for the number, but I feel like you know why I like Facebook? Because you kind of get a sense of like what they're into more. You know, so you could kind of screen them more. I'm not saying that like you're interviewing them or anything.
You technically
like that.
are. You're both interviewing each other in some way.
I hear you, but it's as a frame, it's good because you're kind of coming from this place like at least you're not like you're not like putting the person on a pedestal. You are looking to see if they kind of fit certain kind of criteria that you like. Yeah. And I like Facebook to kind of know what they're about a little bit. Yes, you can find that out from texting them. It just feels like so instant and quick to either access their Facebook or their Instagram. Right. And also, you give them access to yours. You let them see kind of what you're about without having to explain everything all at once. And you don't have to explain everything, but yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know what's so interesting? You just gave me a thought. So, like, remember, I don't know, probably in the 90s or something. I don't know, who knows what those people used to do. So, like, when, you know, you would start, well, let's say you'd meet someone, right? And or maybe you'd get introduced to someone. And so you would start a conversation with them, and then you would be like, hey, you know, like, I'm this person, right? And so tell me a little bit about you, and they tell you a little bit about them. And then the only way of contacting them was essentially through your telephone. So then it's like, you're like, oh, man, you know, I wonder what this person is really like. And then you kind of go on a date with them, and you learn a little bit about them. And then you're like, ooh, I really like them. I want to go on another date. And then you learn a little bit more about them. But it's like now when you do that, and especially if you have like Facebook or Instagram, you probably know, not saying everything, but you know a lot about them way before they're probably even ready to let you know. So, I mean, obviously they're the ones, men and women who give out their Instagram and Facebook, but I mean, interestingly enough, that kind of, let's say, what's it called? That sort of, that slow process, that slow churning process isn't really there anymore. So it's like...
You mean that slow process of like them going through the process of getting to know you and like you.
Right.
I see. So you're kind of bypassing a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, so in that article, and I'm going to pull up her name because I think it's kind of fucked up that I don't have it because I think it's a really important article. And then so interestingly enough, so what she says is that what happens is one of two things. So in the age of obviously social media, what we do is on the one hand, right, we kind of, I don't necessarily we get burned out, but we can become bored with the person where like when we know a lot about them, the sort of mystery is dead and we're like, nah, you know, I don't really care anymore.
We think we know a lot
Yes,
about
that's
them.
true. That's true. So, but, and for some people who post a lot of stuff on Instagram, I mean, I would say we know, not everything, but I would think that we know a lot about them. And so, like, you know, you might go through the day-to-day and you might think, like, wow, man, this is so boring. I don't want to date this person anymore. Mm-hmm. But then at the other end of the spectrum, she argues what also could happen is you might actually really like the person and sort of obsession is triggered, where it goes from, like, I know this much about the person and, oh my God, they're so amazing. And then you go through more and more and it's like you're down this rabbit hole, literally reading everything you possibly can about them.
That's interesting. I feel like I give a lot of people like the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. Even when I see a whole bunch of posts kind of saying what they're about, I still even then don't think that's who they are, ultimately. I understand that if you broke it down, objectively, you could probably get to that. Yep. But even on the surface, I still give them the benefit of that because I feel like they're kind of coming from this place where they're trying to just pick their best moments or what they think is the most appealing, like, to an audience. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe they're like, oh, I'm at a concert.
You know what's so interesting? Yeah. Sometimes people post, like, really boring stuff on Instagram where they'll be like, this is me, like, eating cereal or this is me, like, going to work. So, surprisingly, a lot of people actually do that and you actually get a glimpse into their boring day. All of our lives are boring, but the point is that you get, like, a glimpse into every single sort of part of their boring life. They're like, this is me doing this, and here's me watching TV. Here's a picture of my television set as I watch, like, the NBA Finals or Game of Thrones or whatever. People do that, man. People actually do that.
One thing that actually I wanted to bring up, like, I forgot this, like, at the very beginning of the podcast, but, like, now it's a good idea. The halo effect. When you see someone who looks amazing, beautiful, all that,
right.
A lot of times you assume that they have the best qualities about them, best character traits, everything automatically based on just like, let's say, a pleasant physical appearance.
Yes.
Now here's the thing. A lot of this actually works on both sides, male and female. However, I would say that men tend toward like visual cues for attraction, and women tend more towards behavioral ones. However, they do have they do still look at physical, like physicality. Girls do. Because a lot of, for example, say somebody's a good, like a well-built, like in shape guy, right? Like Leon here. I'm just. But, no. I'm kidding. I was only kidding.
Don't take your compliment back, you scumbag.
But so what may happen is, like, let's say from a woman's perspective, she may think like, oh, okay, he's built so in society, it's like a lot of people think that being built is attractive, right? So somewhere in the back of her head, if it's not conscious, she's like, oh, okay, this is like another form of kind of like a social proof, because you're kind of hitting one of those societal standards that are kind of in the mainstream. It's not necessary, I would say, to have a relationship is just like one of those little things that kind of like could
Right.
trigger off in, let's say, a girl's mind. In a guy's mind, a lot of times it does go towards the physical, like hip to breast ratio. If it's a certain ratio, or if the hips are a little wider or something like that, it shows, like from a evolutionary perspective, that she would bear healthy children.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, a guy, like, I'm not thinking that when I'm
No,
walking
no
around.
one is, right.
But that is like supported in.
Well, yeah, evolutionary psychology.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
And it's also, what else was there? There was also the idea, obviously, that attraction or physical attraction literally indicates health. So, I mean, that has also been argued God knows how many times at this point. Like symmetry, obviously, even like sort of the shape and colors of, well, not color, I think it's the shape of one's eyes, literally the shape of the jawline for men, nose shape. Like, I mean, look, I don't know enough about it to say. I mean, these are certainly very popular theories and ideas.
Whatever you do know.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of evolutionary psychology, I mean, I like it and I love the field a lot, but I got to tell you, out of all the sciences though, it's actually the least supported, right? So, like, it's very hard to prove something like that. Like, I mean, how do you even conduct a questionnaire? Like, hey, why do you really like that person? Is it because they're healthy? I mean, and technically speaking, sort of, we also actually remember. We talked about intuition and system one thinking. So we actually make a really big mistake in terms of like evolution, in terms of what evolutionary psychology posits. So they say, like, when we look at weight, right, we view it as health. Technically speaking, even if that's true, that's actually wrong, right? So intuitively we would see, let's say, somebody who weighs, X, right, who has, let's say, a BMI over like whatever it is, I think it's 30, right? That's considered to be overweight or obese. Technically speaking, we make the assumption automatically that that person is unhealthy. Whereas that person can be completely healthy, whereas the person with a BMI of like 15 or whatever, right, is actually unhealthy, has high blood pressure, has high cholesterol. So if that's the case, I mean, even if, let's say, kind of evolutionarily speaking, that's why we do that, that's why we're attracted to those people, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good indicator of health, because we know from studies that it's actually not.
No, 100%. Like, a Big Mac looks good,
right?
But it's not good for you,
right?
For example, someone who may be young may have a really fast metabolism, so they may look on the surface like
yes.
Really good, but they may be having a terrible diet.
Yeah, which means high cholesterol,
and also probably. Not to say anything bad about anyone, but it probably means poor like functioning of the brain. Like I would say, because there's actually research that supports that if, let's say, high fructose corn syrup, for instance, which a lot of people drink. So I've done it before. I'm actually kind of off soda now, but that took a long time and a lot of unwiring. So I wouldn't blame anybody who's watching if they are drinking. So I'm not trying to say anything like that. But apparently, high fructose corn syrup makes you dumber. Actually, believe it or not. So, and also, like, a poor diet probably is not helping sustain high brain functioning. Like, let's say somebody's also not having what's in krill oil, omega-3s, or in eggs as well, and all that. Say you're not having stuff like that. That's actually important for your neurons to communicate with each other, like for the myelin to be. I mean, we're getting all love and dating right now, but
this so science.
Yeah, but yeah, the myelin, which helps the transfer of the messages between neurons.
It deteriorates.
It's definitely not supported by an unhealthy diet.
Okay.
If you have things that do support it, like, let's say, omega-3s, stuff like that, for instance, would help functioning of the brain.
Right.
There's other things as well, but I'm not trying to get into that right now. Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, essentially, we were talking about kind of what evolutionary psychology tells us about why we're attracted to certain people.
I mean, one thing I've noticed, I mean, I've studied this too, but I'll say this, from firsthand experience, it seems that whoever is the most certain tends to have a lot of, how do I put this, like, somebody will listen more when somebody sounds very certain.
Right.
For instance, if somebody's very confident, there's a reason why somebody will listen to them or be attracted to them. It's because because of their confidence, they're kind of, for lack of a better word, seizing the other person's attention.
Right.
Because what they're saying conveys quote unquote value. Value is a very loaded word, right? Maybe I should define it.
But I get what you mean. That person becomes valuable to the other person, because I'm assuming, if anything, it indicates sort of social status, that this person obviously is highly knowledgeable, hence probably, right, that they obviously are of high social status.
I mean, you could not be and still be very confident.
Here's the thing, though, and you know this, right? Sort of, we are creatures of heuristics. Right, so we sort of make these split, system one type conclusions. And so technically speaking, a lot of times, man, even though, yes, you and I could sit here and posit that rationally and say, no, a lot of times somebody can be very smart and of low social status. Technically speaking, that's not the assumption that a lot of people make, where you see someone who's very smart and you're like, wow, this person is special. Or whatever it is, right? And, here's the other example, right? A friend of mine, right? So he used to drive a BMW, right? Had nothing else going for him. Only had, and I'm not going to obviously mention names. So only drove this BMW, which was literally one of the newer cars at the time. Girls loved it, man. Like the girls that he was going after. Obviously not all girls, right? So the girls that he went after, like, loved it. And in their minds, right, this guy was somebody, right? They're like, oh my God, look at him. Not really, right? So obviously the heuristic says this person is driving a great car, right? Therefore he's, let's say, rich or successful or whatever. None of those things. So literally all he had was the car. So he spent all of his money on the car. So the point essentially is that a lot of times what people do is they take these mental shortcuts. And all of us do these, right? So it's not that all of us have the same mental shortcuts, but we all take mental shortcuts. So we tend to make inferences. Like what you're saying is, there are these other interpretations. A lot of times people take the most available interpretation. So their brain says, nice car, a lot of money, right? Automatically they make that split decision. They're like, this is someone.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast you can make a decision like that. It's fine. I mean, it happens in the moment. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I guess if anyone's listening, like, how could they use what we're saying? Mm-hmm. Like, say that's not really the point of the discussion. We're just trying to figure out like what's going on in the dating world these days. What are people doing? What's it like now? I mean, actually, now that I've said that, let's get into that for a second.
Well, I mean, I do want to focus on the kind of so you know why I think the decisions that we make are important. Just obviously, and we can go on to the other topic. I think it's also as important.
Only because we started with
I hear it. So the reason why heuristics are so important, right? And we talk about this literally, I think, on every show at this point, is because a lot of times we make really poor choices in the people we choose. So now that I'm thinking about it, I love that you brought up the attractiveness, because if you think about it, right, so the biggest mistake that people make is the halo effect. So they look at a beautiful person and they think, oh my God, they're wonderful. So here's the thing, a lot of psychopaths look like that, right? American Psycho. Obviously it's a movie, I get it, but it's actually a really good depiction.
Do you like Huey Lewis in the
news? So yeah, that's really fun.
That's Christian Bale in that movie. Yeah.
So essentially, people do this where, let's say, even with clients of mine, right? So they come to me and they say like, hey, I met this really wonderful person. Literally the first question I ask them is, what do you know about them? And so they'll say, oh, well, like they're this, they're that, they're this. And I'm like, that doesn't really describe much about them. But all of a sudden in their mind, they're like up here on this pedestal. And what I would ask them is like, okay, I mean, are they hot? Like, do you think that they're really attractive? And they would say, yeah, oh my God, very much so. And so then I would actually talk to them about kind of in that aspect of evolutionary psychology that says that we tend to sort of, and this one is actually one of the concepts that can actually be proven, that we tend to ascribe, right, these different sort of beliefs, but then attributes to people that they don't or might not actually really have, just based on physical attraction. So why I think heuristics are important here is because we got to stop doing that. So like, just like with my friend, right, because I got to tell you, this guy, he wasn't really that great to women. So the point was that here they made this sort of conclusion that he was somebody special when, first of all, not only even financially or, in terms of success he wasn't, but even as a person he wasn't. So I'm just saying that in terms of heuristics, right, we need to sort of be conscious of the decisions we make, because a lot of times they're based on mental shortcuts, and those mental shortcuts shouldn't be trusted. Not always.
If somebody has the mental strength to make that kind of decision, to really pay attention to the heuristics,
right.
Kudos.
But here's the thing, though. What do you risk? Think about it.
Probably not a lot of dates.
Heartbreak, right? So imagine if you actually make that split-second decision and you're like, yes, I'm going to go after this person, guy, girl, whomever.
Oh, that's what you mean. Okay.
Right. And then sort of in the long run, you actually find out that, wait, they're actually a pretty shitty person. And then so you've invested all of this time, you've invested all this energy, and then what happens a lot of the times? You're like, oh, maybe I could change this person, right? And how many times have we heard that from men and women? Like, oh my God, I got to be with this girl. I can change her. And then what happens? They can't. And then they don't want to be there anymore.
I mean, here's the thing. It takes energy to want to go out, to meet different people, to meet someone, meet a girl, all that, right? Or from the woman's perspective, meet a guy.
Yeah.
Thing is, from the guy's perspective, after he already finds a girl, it's almost like he's already invested, so he's going to kind of double down on his investment. And like you said, like maybe it'll get to something like, I can change her, or maybe she's okay, or maybe I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. Actually, I'm not against benefit of the doubt.
It depends. How long, right?
It's nuanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's not easy. It's a very hard subject to really talk about. I mean, for instance, how well? I mean, I would say this. Maybe this is better. Because there's some things that I think we do automatically that we, even if we're conscious of this stuff, sometimes it's very hard to do in the moment. Right. So I would say, like, what would be a good thing to focus on? Let's say when dating, or in the matter of love and dating. I think authenticity is important. Mm. If what you're saying is truly how you feel, or also, conversely, what the other person's saying at least sounds like they really mean what they're saying. It's not like an act. It's not like a character.
Be careful with that too, man. So they've actually done studies with this. So in terms of like criminal cases, they would actually, like psychologists would go to judges, right? And they would sort of have, they would kind of conduct experiments with them, right? In terms of like mock cases. So they would like bring forth different people, right, who were actual criminals. And so they would give everybody the story. Like there would be a mock jury and a mock judge. And so then they would ask, the sort of jury and judge, they would say, okay, how believable are they? And the people that were actually at times the most believable with the ones who were the worst liars in terms of how many lies they told in that particular story. So yeah, be really careful with that, because somebody sounds authentic. Hey, Christian Bale in American Psycho seemed like the sweetest guy. Doesn't mean anything, man. And
not really.
Okay, that's true. But he was like,
oh, hey, Paula. This is my real voice, Paula.
Right, it's okay. So he was a charmer. But the point is that a lot of times we kind of fall for these sort of Don Juans, right? These people that seem like they not only have their shit together, they're super confident, like you said. And a lot of times they also pretend to be like nice guys.
Okay, so how about this? Then let me do this then. Okay, so people tend to accept that something is true based on, if I remember correctly, if information passes through one of these unconscious filters in your mind, then you generally tend to accept what they're saying as true. Mm-hmm. One filter that information could pass through is how certain they are of what they're saying, which we just covered. The other one is how in alignment are they with what they're saying, in the sense of how congruent is their behavior, thoughts, words, and actions in alignment with what it is that they're presenting, the information in this case. Then the third thing is how many people buy into what they're saying. So let's say somebody has a social group around them, and let's say you're bringing a potential mate to meet your social group. Right. Perhaps things that you say around them will be supported and accepted as true to that potential mate, for instance. Now, why is that important? I would say, one, from the perspective of, say you're somebody who's trying to find someone, if you knew something like that, and you use this information for good, then you could actually pay attention to how certain you are when you say certain things, how you behave goes along with what you say, and probably how many people in general would agree with what you say. Right. But here's the thing, information has to pass through just one of those filters, generally, for someone to accept what you're saying is true.
Which is so wild.
Yes. So on one level, that's scary because you can just figure that out and be a total douchebag, I guess, and get what you want from knowing things like that. Yeah. From the other side of it, say you know about that and you're not on the defensive, but you're on the other side of this, you could just pay attention to... it's very tough. It actually is very tough. There are cues though in someone's behavior when they're not being authentic, like they're trying to put something on.
So interestingly enough, so they actually did studies on sort of what, obviously about lie detector tests and how do we detect fraud, right, in terms of other people. So what they actually found is that out of all of the different agencies that are tasked with detecting liars and frauds, the only one that is above average in detecting lies in other people is literally the Secret Service. All the rest of us are fucked. We're like 50-50. Even the CIA, by the way. Crazy. That's what makes sort of dating good times obviously so scary.
I believe there's books on it, actually, that actually detail a little micro... we're getting really...
really off topic, I know.
No, not off topic. This is actually related. There are actually micro behaviors that you could learn that people do to kind of that indicate where it is they are in their head. Even things as simple as which direction they're looking at when thinking a thought. Not joking. If somebody's looking down and to the right, for instance, believe it, and they're trying to remember something, they're remembering it through a kinesthetic modality. Meaning they're thinking about it in terms of feeling. Like, how did I feel when I remembered this? I feel I'm gonna talk about this more in the future because I used to remember what everything meant. I was using that as an example. I used to be very conscious of this stuff, but I want to do it again. It feels useful for the show. Whatever. But anyway,
I hear you.
Right, back on
dating. Right.
Yes.
So it's definitely hard to like meet a partner and obviously trust a partner. So what did you say the three things were? So
how certain you are, how in alignment you are with what you're saying, and how many people buy into what it is that you're saying.
Sounds like a cult leader.
It's possible. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That or let's say you just have a bunch of people around you who just happen to which could be a cult. For instance.
Definitely. I can imagine that they know these things. That they know that psychology.
Yes.
Mass psychology.
Yes. So there's things like that. There's also other things that are very important, like for instance recognizing so one thing that's interesting is if somebody is very reactive, it kind of demonstrates that they're in their head, in the sense that they may be thinking too much, they may be insecure, things like that. So for instance, somebody who's not doing so well with the opposite sex may actually exhibit some characteristics that come off as reactive. Little twitches, a lot of just not being able to like convey a message, and they're kind of conveying their futtering, stuttering mental thoughts to you. And it's, for example, that's not very attractive for the opposite sex. For instance, if somebody's speaking, let's say, again, back to authenticity, if somebody's speaking authentically, usually what they say comes out kind of like in a very, for lack of a better way of putting this, in a flowy manner. It just comes out clear, usually.
That's one interpretation.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because if somebody has an anxiety disorder, I mean, or if somebody has a stutter, I mean, it's very hard to, and they could be genuine people. And a lot of people with stutters really are genuine people, as we talked about.
I'll be honest with you, there was a time when I was very anxious. Coincidentally, I was not doing very well with the opposite sex.
I'm not surprised because of the interpretation that whoever was that was having it, right? But the point was that it wasn't that you were being disingenuous.
Fair enough. It's not this, but but again, the heuristics, right?
Yes.
It's like you give off a signal on the surface, like you're not a good mate because of that.
Right.
So they will instantly kind of judge you based on that. It's not a nice thing. No. It just happens to be what it is currently. No. Perhaps through discussion of this, it's possible that people will think a little bit differently about it, but I'm not necessarily aiming for that. No. It's just an interesting thing to talk about. Maybe somebody could kind of gain something from this. I think the certainty thing is interesting as far as that goes.
And you know what's so interesting? I just thought of this. So I'm thinking, right? So now that we have people's, let's say, Facebooks and Instagram, and I wonder, right? So let's say somebody, like initially, sometimes we do this, we fuck shit up. And I wonder if sometimes initially somebody makes a bad impression, right? But then let's say somehow this other person ends up coming across your Facebook or your Instagram, and they're like, you know what? This person's actually kind of cool. Maybe I actually would give them a chance. And then something would happen and they're like, hey, whatever, like I was wrong, or like let's say not necessarily I was wrong, but maybe they would decide to message them and say, hey, it was nice meeting you at the party, I'm kind of sorry for brushing you off, whatever. But I'm wondering if actually social media could also be used for good. Why are you smiling?
No, it just you know when somebody sometimes tells you like something like that, an example,
right?
But then it feels like they're drawing from something personal. So I was like, interesting.
Am I? I mean,
it's fine. We should.
I mean, technically, no. I will. So I don't. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if there was a time that social media actually hurt me, but I do think in some ways it could have been helpful, because like a lot of the stuff that I have is like kind of political, and a lot of people here are obviously liberals. A lot of the stuff I post is like pictures of my friends and like I don't know, doing stuff with people. So technically speaking, obviously depending heavily on what your social media is consisted of. I think a lot of times it actually can help you, especially if the first impression isn't great.
Actually, one thing I thought with with the change in the dynamic when social media as a way of presenting yourself was more and more of a thing. Right. I understand we're going back years now at this point, but it's actually not that long ago if you really think about it. Mm-hmm. But the weird thing to me is initially actually that shift in the dynamic actually messed with me a bit, because I was like, whoa, why is this important? Like, do I really have to be posting over here? Like, how much time should I be using for this? Also, like, I mean, it's fun. Like, for example, I like Facebook. I like the news feed. I like when you like certain pages, you get certain articles, stuff like that. I like Facebook for that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I like to post my life too, but it's not like you always want everyone to know exactly what's going on in your life. Mm-hmm. Not because you don't. It's not like you have anything against people knowing it. You could. There's nothing wrong with that either. You could value your privacy. Mm-hmm. But it was a very strange thing, because the moment it became apparent that you almost not have to, but it's kind of like the socialized thing now. Initially, like, I wasn't prepared for it. I knew some people that by the like just arbitrary luck, they were able to like make it work. And then that's how you kind of get cases of, oh, this is how well social media works. Is people just kind of figured out either by trial and error or just luck, you know? And I feel like a lot of people got kind of messed with mentally, at least with the momentum of it, maybe in the beginning. Even now, I bet there's people who struggle with having like a good social media or caring about social media. There's probably people who don't have social media as well. Yeah. And then that's interesting also, like, let's say you're meeting somebody and they're like, what's your Instagram? You say, I don't have an Instagram. And they may instantly think like, whoa, that's kind of weird. Huh.
It's interesting.
She doesn't have an Instagram.
And that's something our friend Liz actually said to us earlier, where she said if she wouldn't give somebody her Facebook or said that she didn't have one, all of a sudden she was deemed a suspect. Like, whoa, what do you have to hide? And that's the heuristic, right? Oh, they're not on social media. Something's wrong with them.
Well, yeah, and plus it is helpful to know that the person that you're meeting has friends. It makes them seem more safe. Like, for instance, there's, at least from the girl's perspective, there's a lot of creepy guys. And what does creepy mean? Like someone who's not well calibrated. At least from the girl's perspective, even if a guy's like quote unquote a nice person, if they are acting in like an anxious, twitchy, whatever kind of a way, and they're not able to communicate clearly what it is that they're trying to communicate, they will come off as creepy and uncalibrated to the girl. And I can't blame them for thinking that they're creepy, because then there's a bunch of other people who, it's not even just the nice guy who's doing it, it's also just the uncalibrated, weird, what's weird?
Well, yeah.
Uncalibrated.
Socially kind of awkward.
No, there might be a person who's like really wants to use them, but also socially awkward. Right. And those people like could, potentially, they represent like potential harm to females. Also, guys who get rejected, a lot of times they, I've seen it before. They get like violent, really resistant. Their ego flares up. They're like, "How could you, me, the big one, whatever." Well, never mind.
But the big kahuna, yeah, how dare you? No, they do things like that. How dare you, little peon, reject me?
Yeah, something like that. And it's weird for the girl, because it would be so much easier if just like it was like this. Right. Oh, let's go out. No.
Nah.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
And actually, believe it or not, like maybe 6 times out of 10, this is a made-up statistic, by the way, but like really sometimes they would be like, kind of like, oh, whoa, it was very, that was just like a nonchalant, okay, like he doesn't care. And actually kind of, then they might bring the traction back up. Because like sometimes, even if you're pretty good, like in terms of how you convey yourself, you could make a mistake, but then you kind of pull back a little and then say something again, and you could kind of, it's like a thermometer. Attraction could go like this.
Yes.
And then sometimes back up.
And here's also the thing. So a lot of times people are rejected because of ambivalence, right? So maybe the girl, the guy, whomever is thinking like, I'm not so sure about this person. Like, I like these things about them, but I don't like that about them. So I'm not really sure where I fall on the attraction, where they fall to me on the attraction scale. So interestingly enough, if you can handle rejection like a fucking mature adult, sometimes that kind of tips the scale to you. And so one of two things will happen. The person person says, "Oh shit, I fucked up," and they just kind of move along and forget about it because they're like, I don't want to really go back and say, no. By the way, I want to date you now. But at the other end, sometimes people will do that and they say, you know what? Like I thought about it and I really just made a mistake. And if you're still interested, I would love to go out with you. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, that would actually be pretty cool. That's like the dream.
That sounds
scenario,
like a fantasy,
right? That's like the dream scenario. It's like, no, I'm good.
Sometimes.
Wait a minute. But I think rejection is an important conversation, though.
100%. I think you should be willing to. Yeah. Wow. So, for example, say you're someone who has kind of wow. Okay.
Boom. Let's do.
Yeah, I just got an idea. So, there's two kinds of strategies I would say in terms of meeting the opposite sex. Let's say from a guy's perspective, there's a reactive strategy and a proactive strategy.
Right.
Reactive strategy is kind of like you go about your life. Maybe some girl will notice you, and she'll be like, "Hey, you, come here. I'd like to take you out." Right? How often does that happen?
Probably 1%, maybe 10%.
I would say 1% of 1%. It doesn't. It could happen. It's happened. I've had it happen, but I could count it on one hand, and it's less than 5. I think it's 2.
Okay.
My fingers knew it was 2 before my mom did.
There was recently one.
Yeah, but I won't fully get into that. No, it's a private thing. Yeah. But I'll say this. That's a reactive strategy. Kind of wait for something to happen, and it's not very good because there's so many factors that play into that. Even if you met all of society standards, on the superficial level, rich, good-looking, a bunch of social relationships. Forget some of the other standards, but along those lines, etc., right? If you meet those, even if you still went with the reactive strategy, if you're not kind of presenting yourself to someone, it is very rough to still get any kind of result.
Right.
You may still get it, oddly, here and there, but I don't think that's a good strategy. Now, why did I bring that up in terms of rejection? It's because of this other strategy, which is a proactive strategy. Proactive strategy would be actually getting up. You don't have to necessarily get up, but you have to take action. You say, "Hi,
I'm Leon."
Something like that. You say, you approach. Right. You actually take action, right? And that's, for example, that's easier said than done. But once you actually begin the momentum of taking action, it actually becomes something you can be very comfortable with.
Right.
Anything, we discussed this in an earlier episode, anything that you do for the first time is not going to be comfortable. Right. You may experience resistance, not so great feelings. But actually, instead of experiencing that as something that's pulling you back and like something you shouldn't be doing and your understanding of the world is kind of going backwards, it's actually really good for you because what you're doing is kind of breaking down this rigid personality structure that you had of yourself where you couldn't approach before. This is not something natural that you do. You're kind of letting yourself kind of expand in terms of your identity.
Right.
This is something, though, that would expand not from just doing this once. It would be from doing it
several times.
Several times.
It's a process.
It's definitely a process. Now, and also, I would recommend if somebody is going to do the proactive strategy, it is really about momentum. And I would say to go out as often as possible if you're in trying to look for someone.
At least put yourself out there.
Put yourself out there. Like, for instance, say you go out to a social... It's also helpful to have friends with you. Right. You don't have to, but say you do. That's good because it shows, again, it's social proof that you're safe. Right. Somebody likes you enough to be around you.
Right.
So it already gives... it gives you something in terms of the potential mate's eyes. Let's say also, since you have your friends there, let's say you could bring them to hang out with you and your friends. You kind of show them what your world is like. Not a lot of investment from them because you're kind of creating, you're kind of doing the work. So you're showing them what it's like to be around you, which is good because, like, for instance, to ask someone you don't know to highly invest is not easy. For instance, even if somebody's walking outside that you want to stop, to stop them is actually a big investment. I've noticed actually, if you actually try to like stop someone outside, they a lot of times will not stop. If they do, that's cool. It happens sometimes. but a lot of times you have to kind of walk with them. When you're walking with them and then you're saying whatever it is that you're saying, maybe hello, or I noticed this about, or I like this thing you're wearing, or something like that. There's no investment from them. You're just talking. Now there will be a point. Wow. I'm sorry. In general, I'm not trying to get full on tactics or anything. Main idea though is to have a proactive strategy. Keep trying. If I'm sure there's resources out there that if you wanted to check out, about dating or something like that, they're out there. But at least from what I'm going to say, from my ability to speak on it, I would just say, definitely taking action is very important. And embracing rejection. And actually, what's cool is, and this is related to Albert Ellis, which is once you get rejected enough, you may notice that you stop caring. It's weird. It's
as much.
Right.
So there's never going to come a point where you will never care about rejection, because it's just not how we're built. Because the thing is, we are social creatures and we need each other to survive. So technically speaking, the sort of fear of social rejection is ingrained in us. That isn't something that we can just turn off. But the point is that when you expose yourself over multiple times, and look, I couldn't even tell you this from my personal life, man, because why not? So I've been rejected God knows how many times. I don't know. I mean, obviously I can't say I've tried that many times, but I've had my fair share of rejection. And I got to tell you, man, so on top of the stuff that we talk about, the sort of stoic mindset and the CBT stuff where I'm like, oh, I'm not a loser or reject, this is just this thing that happened to me. On top of the fact that I've been exposed to it so many times, I got to tell you, man, it doesn't bother me like it used to. I can't tell you that it doesn't bother me at all, or there's definitely some hurt there. I can't say there isn't, but it's nowhere. So here's where I started off. So when I was and I'm, kind of, we talked about this before, I struggled with anxiety when I was a kid, and I wrote about this, whatever. So the point is, when I was a kid, my fear of rejection was literally at a 95%, where I was like, oh my God, and I saw rejection where there wasn't any. And then now I would say, if it's there, it would probably be at a 40, right? Which is, I think, a huge drop off.
That's huge.
And that's a
huge improvement.
Yeah, and I think that's literally because of therapy. My own therapy, seeing 2 therapists on my own, and literally the CBT skills that I learned in school. So unfortunately, the therapists that I saw were in CBT, but I didn't even really need CBT from therapists, just for the simple fact that these were techniques I learned in school.
Were you seeing them not to get away from what you're saying, but did you see them both at the same time?
No. So technically my first therapist left because she actually went to work for the VA, which was super fucking cool. And for me as a student...
What's the VA?
Veterans Administration.
Okay.
So at that time I was like, wow! Literally because she was a specialist in trauma, so she went to work with veterans. And then so it literally took me about... speaking of rejection. So because even though I told myself, I was like, you know what, I don't care. I understand that she had to leave. It literally took me another probably year to see another therapist because I was kind of hurt by her leaving. Oh, so that's how afraid of rejection I was. That even though she didn't reject me, this was nothing personal, and if I were in her shoes, I would have done the same thing. I was still pretty hurt by it. So when I went to see my new therapist, she was like, oh, so do you want supervision or therapy? I'm like, whoa. I'm like, I don't need therapy. Because I was like, I don't want to go through that again. But then after some time, she became my therapist rather than my supervisor, and kind of, sort of little by little, I got over my fear of rejection. But the point is essentially for us that, yes, your point about Albert Ellis and just about kind of behaviorism in general is right. So actually, the more you try, and I would honestly, and if you guys hear this, I promise you, well, you are going to hear it, but you're going to flip. So I would say get rejected more, literally. If I could, so my reframe, right, every single time I would get rejected, it's have you ever watched probably not, I know Mike is into ECW, right? So there was this really great scene where it's a old wrestling company, Extreme Championship Wrestling. So there was this really great scene where Tommy Dreamer, right, who was at the time a babyface and everybody hated him. So everybody hated him. They thought he was this stuck-up prick, right? So he had this match with the Sandman, right? And the Sandman ended up just beating the shit out of him with a kendo stick. And this is real because ECW just did shit that literally pushed it to the limit. So, and Tommy kept getting up and he's like, thank you, sir, may I have another? And he took 50 lashes. Yeah, he
Breakfast Club.
Right. And he literally, and that was the thing with Tommy. They called him something like Breakfast Club Tommy or whatever it was. Maybe I'm wrong. But the thing is, he wore the varsity jacket and he was this goody two shoes, Leave It to Beaver type. So when he did that and he took 50 lashes in real life, life. And so the way I think of rejection is like, you need to do that, man. Like, and for him, right, he actually became the innovator of violence after, which I know sounds obviously kind of silly because it's a wrestling show, but I think there is a point here. And the point essentially was that without that beating, he couldn't have known what he was capable of. So I don't know if he knew before or not, but it seemed like probably not, because he actually never did anything like that before. But after, he literally would go in there and he was like the fucking king. He would take beatings like he didn't before, and he would give them like he didn't before. So the point is that he learned something about himself, and he grew through that lashing. So in terms of the suffering itself, yes, sounds kind of masochistic, obviously, but rejection honestly is something that all of us can handle. So I would argue that honestly, guys, like, if you can, literally go get rejected more. And that's something Albert Ellis would vouch for. He would say, look, go to the subway and literally just point up to the sky and just start yelling. And when I tell people that, they're like, what? Like, I can't do that. That's not possible. And I'm like, no, it is. You don't understand. Because the lesson that you're going to learn from that is more important than anything I could ever tell you in this room. The lesson that your mind learns, right, is more important than any book that you read, and it's more important than anything you learn from in therapy. Because what you're going to get from that lesson is that any of that rejection or that judgment or that criticism that you get, none of it really matters.
One thing that's beautiful is a lot of the reason why, or rather, first of all, that's beautiful. The wrestler example, it sounded so cool, kind of
right,
me.
Right, I love Tommy, man.
So one thing I definitely wanted to say is, and maybe this is helpful to frame it this way too, is I don't think anyone can cultivate 100% core confidence, like really, like just full on confidence.
Psychopaths have it. That's it. And I wouldn't suggest.
But I'm talking about cultivating.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. So I don't think you could, but what you could cultivate is indifference. By getting enough reference experiences of of those rejections, and then seeing nothing happens from it, and in fact, or if you do feel anything from it, it's kind of like it's a thing that helps you grow. It kind of expands your character. It's really good for you, actually. You again, like the wrestler, you kind of get knocked down, but then you come back stronger and you behave in a way you never did before. It's actually really cool.
Right.
Yeah.
And he learned what he was capable of. I mean, the thing is, I don't know how real, obviously, it was in terms of the storyline, because the thing is, before then, Tommy actually was never in any, like, big, like, hardcore matches. And then after that, like, this dude was taking a beating in and week out. So if I had to hope, right, my hope would be, like, you know what, that moment told Tommy Dreamer, I'm fucking extreme. Like, I can do this. And literally after that, he was the innovator of violence.
So Albert Ellis yelling, right? For instance, one thing that's very interesting to me, it reminds me of something like called unstifling. So for instance, so you know how I was talking about being reactive before versus proactive? Well, sometimes like it's not so easy to get out of that headspace where you're in your head. So how can you do that? Well, actually, yeah, Albert Ellis's yelling like that out loud in public in a socially deviant way kind of goes past what like level of volume you might allow yourself to go to in that particular environment. Right. So what's interesting is if you tried to do something similar to that, not even saying don't do that, if you actually tried to do something similar to that, you would realize nothing happens. You would cultivate that indifference almost instantly. And also, you kind of feel a little bit freer to kind of move around and stuff like that. For instance, there's this thing I showed our friend Liz at a barbecue not so long ago. It's something that I learned from a friend of mine, kind of like a mentor. And it was this thing where, I'll even do it right now, actually. You go like this. You go like... Yes, 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 like, you know, like that, all that, right? Now, Leon is shocked. He's like, what the fuck? There's a lot of energy here. I'm trying to sit and chill and have a conversation. But also, like, from my perspective, like, if I had to explain how I feel right now, very amped up. All of a sudden, you see, like, how my arms are moving around. I only just noticed that after the fact, but that is actually kind of like more of a freedom. I feel a little more loose. And I feel like I could do something crazy right now. I don't know what that thing would be, but say, for instance, it's in relation to the opposite sex. I suppose if you did something like that, I wouldn't recommend to do that every time. You might look actually a little... Like, sometimes it is okay to be a social chameleon, but when you're starting off and, let's say, you're really not used to this kind of stuff, doing things like that actually is very helpful. Somewhere down the line, once you have a certain kind of social, like, level of acuity, you may decide not to do that. There may be no point. You may be like... No. Like there's a saying: the loudest person in the room, sometimes the weakest person in the room, only from the frame of trying to be the loudest to get attention and to
It depends. Context,
depends.
Yeah,
it's very much depends.
Right.
Yeah,
Nuanced.
It is a very nuanced thing. Yeah, obviously, if somebody's a performer and they're performing and they're the loudest one in the room, obviously they're not the weakest one in the room. No. It's a different kind of frame there. But if somebody's always trying to do yes, and then go approach someone or something like that, it's an interesting thing to do after a while.
Right, because
at the beginning it's okay.
Because I think the point is not to get attention, right? The point of doing the yes thing is to amp yourself up.
Even if it gets attention, right? Say you're doing it outside, you could prove to yourself that it doesn't do anything. People will look just for a little bit, but then you'll notice that they go back to either thinking about their own concerns or something along those lines.
And that's exactly what behaviorism and Ellis was teaching, essentially. That even if you go on a train, and I remember I did this with a kid before, so she was afraid of going on airplanes, and I was like, oh, you know what we could do? Let's have you hold up the line. She's like, what? Are you crazy? I'm like, no. I'm like, I'm telling you, this is like really good. I'm like literally purposely, like, just go and tie your shoes, see what happens. She, of course, never did it because she was afraid, which is absolutely okay. And I mean, I'm okay with not, obviously, and I should be okay with not pushing, kind of these sort of experiments on people. But the point is that if she did do it, it would have actually helped her a lot, because her fear was of, let's say, holding up the line and like literally being ridiculed in public, which would like never happen because she was like 12. I was like, nobody's going to do that to you. And now that's why I felt safe telling her, like, yeah, you should hold up the line, because I was like, dude, you're a kid. Nobody's going to do that to you. And she, whatever. But the point is essentially that when you kind of do that, when you get into that mindset of like, oh, okay, you know what? People really don't care so much. Then obviously it's not the point for you to keep doing these absurd tasks over and over again. But the point is for you to be able to actually live your life, to be able to go out and live your life, and to do the things that you should normally be able to do, and kind of what's called, a healthy mindset or a healthy life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in terms of love, right? Because actually, it just came to me to like speak on it a little bit. A lot of people, what they consider love, is kind of like this sort of like codependence. Like maybe you could help me out here. I would love to give a definition right now on codependence or love from that frame, but like maybe you're more qualified.
Yeah, okay.
Not maybe, 100%.
Well, I mean, in terms of codependence...
I know, what a weird thing to say.
Maybe, perhaps. I mean, a little bit. Some say. It's okay. So, essentially, codependence is the feeling that, or I don't know if it's necessarily, would you call it as a feeling? Well, it's the state. I think that's a better way to describe it. So, it's a state of believing that you absolutely need this other person to live and to survive. And I don't mean like live as in sort of I don't mean live in terms of like let's say like literally like live, like I need to live. I mean like figuratively, where you think you would have like an emotional breakdown and it would be a devastation to you if that person ever left you. So emotional, and I would say if I had to contrast that with real love, and this I hesitate to define, right, because I'm technically not a philosopher or a scholar of love, but
I have like a one particular working definition. I don't mind.
Okay.
It's
Well, let me just define codependence.
Yes.
Okay, so codependence is essentially the state that you believe, or in which you believe that you can't live without the other person. So it's this idea that essentially there's me and there's this other person and we're enmeshed. Like I am them and they are me, and it's like I can't sort of breathe without this person. Again, obviously, figuratively speaking. But the point is that the other person, right, sort of lives and dies with that person. And they're so context dependent that they sort of live and die with every sort of rejection or every sort of ghost in the text, right? Every sort of, I love you, every sort of here, I got you a gift. But like with every single thing that happens, right, their self-esteem sort of is this seesaw effect where they absolutely need this person in order to live. And what I mean by that is that they need them to feel good about themselves.
And it's like a conditional kind of love.
Yeah.
As opposed to...
Yes, and that was the definition that I had with actual love. So interestingly enough, someone said to me, and I'm thinking of one particular person, but technically a lot of people say this, where they say it's okay to be selfish in love. I actually don't agree with that. So if it's actual real love, and my conception and understanding of what love is. So that statement of if you love someone, set them free, I really think that that's what love is. So if you actually love someone, it's not that you want to possess them, right? Which is what 70-80% of people want to do, probably, where they want to possess the person, literally codependent, and where they're like, I need you for everything. I need you for validation. I need you for reassurance. I need you, for moral, emotional support, etc. Right? And oh, by the way, just to kind of...
And to support a like a socially structured family, like a family structure.
Right. And
also.
And by the way, and I want to sort of be clear on this, because I know even though we're talking in kind of generalizations here, so this happens a lot more for men, by the way, than for women, where sort of women are the givers and men are the takers. Where men are like, yeah, yeah, I'm codependent on this girl because she deserves, or I deserve it, or I deserve for her to provide all of these necessities for me. So it's more so with men that this happens than with women. But kind of going back to the point was that essentially what happens in a codependent relationship is, you know how, like, let's say you and I are friends, right? And, like, we want each other to be happy. We're like, yeah, I don't care if you're, like, on the other side of the world, right? As long as you're happy, I'm happy, right? But it's friendship. I mean, that's any good friendship. So, interestingly enough, love, or at least the way love manifests, like, in modern times, right?
In a codependent
Yeah, and codependency is not like that. So, codependency is like, how could you leave me, right? How could you have abandoned me? I needed you.
Why are you going on vacation
alone? Well, or why are you going with your friends? Huh? Are you with a girl? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? So, the point is that it's so, like, intertwined, and people have become so enmeshed where it's not so much about their happiness, and it's not so much about, let me sort of feel good about this person's accomplishments or what this person is up to because they're having a good time, but it's like, why am I sort of bereft of all of those things? So, and also, interestingly enough, in a codependent relationship, there's also a lot of jealousy. And I don't even mean only in terms of, and I don't mean only in terms of like, oh, this person might leave me, or they're talking or seeing someone else, talking to or seeing someone else, but there's also jealousy in terms of the other person's accomplishments too. So it's like, oh my God, this person has achieved this person's here, or let's say I'm here, this person's here. What does that mean? Are they going to leave me? Are they going to be too good for me now? Am I not good enough? And sort of all of these questions go to the other person's mind, where it literally becomes a toxic love. And so why codependency is essentially, it's not a diagnosis or a diagnosable term, but the point is it is a clinical term because that's what happens to people who are in codependent relationships, where not only do they obviously, like, they feel like they can't live or breathe without the other person, but then on top of that, they're actually not even happy with the other person a lot of the time, because they're always in their minds, they're always thinking, what are they up to? What are they doing? Oh my God, they've achieved this thing. Does this mean they're going to leave me? Why am I not good enough? Does this person think I'm not good enough? And then they'll start badgering them and harassing them with questions and thoughts and ideas, and they put things together, right? It's like, have you ever seen that meme with, like, I forgot what show it was from, with that guy, and he has like he connects all the dots, right? And it's like, Rrr! That's what people in codependent relationships are like. So they connect all of these dots and they form all of these different conspiracies in their minds, and the other person is like, what the fuck?
And they believe in the conspiracy.
Yeah, and they believe it. And the thing why, and the reason why they believe it is, so remember last week we talked about your core beliefs coloring your interpretations? That's it. I'm not good enough. I'm unlovable. Therefore, of course, they're cheating on me. How could it have been otherwise?
It's literally codependent relationships, things like jealousy, all that, which actually kind of cultivated my own, why I despise the ego.
Yeah.
Like, it was literally, I had a relationship back in the day, not to get too deep into it, but long story short, I was the person who was actually jealous in that relationship. However, I did actually genuinely love the person as well. Mm-hmm. Thing is, there was a point where my behavior shifted, and I no longer behaved that way. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't being authentically expressed at all. I believed in all these stories in my head, all these conspiracies, as you say, and because of that, I literally caused, you could argue, the end of the relationship. Yeah. And also anything that I may have said that may have gotten any kind of reaction, let's say, from her. Mm-hmm. If I'm the progenitor of the misconception, you can argue still it's my fault, because it just made the conversation go that way, right, that path.
Because people don't like to be accused of things they're not guilty of.
It's strange. It's like it's like an equation, you know? I added like a weird variable to the equation, mm-hmm. and then that ruined the entire result of the equation.
Yeah, and I've done that too, man. And the thing is, I think, but like, when do we do these? Like, when do we do these things as teenagers?
I did it early 20s.
Okay. I'm guilty of that too. But it sucks, 20s. Man, because it's like, I think there were a decent amount of good relationships that I ruined because of. And you know what else I sometimes did? I was such a dick to girls, like literally. Well, I mean, that's kind of a dick. So just because I would feel like inferior or insecure, where I would say something like as this sort of passive aggressive joke, and they'd be like, what the fuck? And I'm like, what? You're like mad sensitive, even though I'm the asshole. But yeah, I think we've done it. I think we've done our share of pushing.
Were you negging?
What's negative?
I'm just kidding. That's where you say like a negative remark about the girl to kind of spark attraction, because it shows you're kind of like it's like you're not like doing the same thing every other guy does.
Right.
Where you're like, oh, you're so great.
Yeah. No, actually, I was not doing that. I was literally doing that to be defensive. If I had to sort of give myself some sort of psychoanalytic interpretation, I would say the reason for doing this was because I felt down here, and to me they were like up here, so I had to do something to kind of crash them down too, right? And thankfully, I don't do this anymore.
So there's a quote by. It's an interesting person to pick for this quote. Osho. You ever heard of that guy?
Of course.
Okay, so...
What was his name? Bhagavad? No. I don't even remember. Yeah, but I know, obviously.
Yes. So there's actually a Netflix documentary that came out about...
That was his name.
Yeah, the Bhagwan, yeah. Okay, so I'll say this. I heard this and I listened to him a bunch before I knew about any of that stuff. So I'm not going to throw him out. Like, I won't say that, I won't disregard things that he said, but I am aware of that documentary, so, like, fair enough if somebody's like, that's a strange person to cite right now.
Here's the thing, though. You know why I disagree with that? Because
what, it was his cult people who were creating problems?
No, so I disagree with what the person would say. Like, it's a strange person to cite. Technically speaking, you can actually, and people might kill me here, but you can actually get wisdom from Scientology. And here's why. Because a lot of it is actually ripped off. So just because he says something smart, first of all, it doesn't mean that it's coming from him. So a lot of times these gurus or like these fake kind of prophets or whatever cult leaders, they actually have good wisdom because they get it from other literature. Like L. Ron Hubbard from Scientology, he read like millions of books.
Yes, and Scientology, for instance, is very self-helpy, actually. Yes. A lot of it, which is very
and that's how they sort of suck people in. So when you obviously go down the rabbit hole, you find that it's like really batshit crazy stuff. Yeah. But in the beginning, the stuff that they teach you makes a lot of sense.
So, the thing that Osho said is if you find a flower, right, and you pick it up, it dies. You try to make it yours, it dies. If you let it be where it is, you give it freedom. True love gives freedom, for instance, something else that he said. Right. Then you're allowing the flower to live, for instance. And like meditate. I thought about that for a while. I want to say the word meditate, but
you reflected. Oh, that's fine.
Guy.
Yes,
but anyway,
reflected.
Yeah, I reflected on it. I meditated.
Oh God.
Yeah, having fun. But whatchamacallit? Yeah, I thought about it a lot, and then after a while of really thinking about that and like considering that I really like, for instance, that relationship that I'm talking about, that I talked about before. Yeah. I did realize I really cared about the person. So the moment I really thought about like quotes like that, for instance, I did kind of let go of the need to possess her and know everything about what's going on and try to get back with her and all this kind of stuff. And at that point, actually, it was nice because then anytime we spoke afterwards, it was completely cool. It kind of healed the relationship. Yeah. We didn't get back together. That's completely fine. That was not... initially it was, but it didn't. That wasn't the point later. The main point was it was somebody I got along with, and it was somebody who was like important to me. And to like knock somebody, like to take someone away from your life who was very important to you, just because they don't want to be in a relationship with you. If you really broke it down, it's really strange because it doesn't change any of the good things they ever did, any things that you might have learned with them, any of the good experiences that you had. It's just that maybe briefly you had a disagreement. It's kind of this short-term kind of a thing that could have long-term repercussions. But if you're cognizant of that, maybe it doesn't always have to turn to some kind of toxic end or some kind of bad end where you can't talk to the person again. Yeah. I think there is a way where if you did not end up having you couldn't end up having the relationship with the person for some reason, you both just kind of went two different ways or something. I think there is a peaceful resolution to it where you could still still have a deep respect for the person, but then also understand we don't mix now or something like that.
It's hard, man. It's just that's the thing.
But it's an important distinction because, especially if you really care about, if you really, say somebody is listening to this and they're in a relationship and then they notice they might have these things like jealousy, this, that, and whatnot, and it's a very common thing. If you really broke it down, you really thought about it, and you said, okay, but do I truly love this person? You may be able to psych yourself out of those behaviors, even though they feel deeply ingrained and you do believe in the conspiracies and the storytelling and all that. Again, why did I say earlier I despise the ego? The moment I learned about ego and all that, a lot of the conspiracy stories, ideas, all these things that would lead me to go to all these different conclusions, I completely, the moment they came up, even if they felt like they had a certain momentum to them, and I really believed in it even for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. After those 5, 10 seconds, even a minute, whatever it took, I would be able to not believe in the story and disregard it as bullshit, like as spawned of just out of insecurity or something like that, but not the real truth. And so I guess if somebody's listening to it, they have all these jealous thoughts. I mean, by the way, this is not to say that what if you're right about your jealous thought.
Yeah, so sometimes, interestingly, so sometimes the ego can be protective, because sometimes you are right about your jealous thoughts.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I guess what you're saying is for you it was overblown. Like you didn't have enough evidence for the sort of theories that you had.
Yeah, for me, so again, it's a nuanced thing. In the case that I'm talking about, I would completely disregard all jealous thoughts, all stuff like that. And by being able to begin to disregard them, I think that kills the momentum of that kind of thinking. I don't know. What do you think? Because say somebody actually is experiencing feelings of jealousy, stuff like that, and say their goal is like, I want to stop this before this actually turns into something toxic. What would you...
So interestingly enough, it's actually a disorder. I mean, I know people say like everything is pathologized these days, but the point is that this actually can be a disorder. So there's something called delusional disorder, and there's actually a jealous type of it. And the jealous type of it is actually so hard that it's so difficult to treat that it's actually resistant to like any sort of cognitive reframing. So so to answer your question, what I would do is I would go straight to the thought record. So if there's a jealous particular belief, right, I would sort of ask them, okay, so like let's say these are the actions, right? What does this mean to you? So evidence for, evidence against, right? What do you think your friend would tell you at this time? And then I would also ask them, okay, so let's say if we reframe the thought, right? So if the thought was reframed from she is cheating on me, the negative automatic thought, to, okay, there's really no evidence of it. Or let's say she was likely out with her friends because of evidence against, or indicated that she was essentially out with her friends. So interestingly enough, so when you go through this with people with delusional disorder, a lot of times it does nothing, man. And I can't explain this, obviously, because I've never had this disorder and like in that particular sort of form. Well, I mean, it is that disorder, right? Because technically, I mean, you could be jealous, which I obviously have been, but not to that extent. So I don't understand like how it sort of works, but the thing is, in their minds, they actually in some way convince themselves that their therapist even, right, is feeding them bullshit in order to calm them down. That's how sort of deep the beliefs are. But if, let's say, if it's somebody who doesn't, maybe even if they do, but after some time, kind of we've been working on it and the evidence is built up against that belief. So even with that particular person, if let's say they kind of accept it, right, to some extent. Okay, it's likely that she's not cheating on me and that it's sort of my own thinking, right, that's causing me to feel this way. Then I would ask them, okay, so what do you think, right, if let's say we have this negative automatic thought of she's cheating on me, right, what does this actually say about you if it doesn't say anything about her? And then you sort of go down that rabbit hole of, okay, I mean, what does this mean? And the meaning a lot of times is that I'm unlovable, or I'm unworthy, or I'm not good enough. So from that accusation, you actually learn a lot about the person, and the person learns a lot about themselves if they allow themselves to. So to kind of answer your question, right, after doing a lot of these thought records, and sometimes it's like infinity because it feels like it goes on forever, if they finally accept it, like, holy shit, look at all of this evidence against her cheating on me, then we switch it to, okay, so what does this say about you? And then they kind of learn that, you know what, I really feel like shit about myself, which is why I accuse her of all of these things.
And then what's the action afterwards?
No, to really figure out why you feel like shit about yourself. And I promise you, 9 times out of 10, those people don't have anything bad to feel about, or don't have any good reason to feel bad about themselves. Yeah, so it's like with regular therapy, the idea is essentially, why do you feel like shit about yourself, right? What do you feel like you don't have? What are you missing, right? Is there a way to kind of reframe your values that actually makes more sense with what you want to be, or what do you actually think you should be? Not maybe what society has taught you that you should be, or your parents, or your toxic family, or whomever, but literally, like, what values are you supposed to have in order to feel good about yourself? So then what people start to do is they essentially start to reframe what they want to be, and then they obviously start to try to achieve it. And then when they do that, they can look back and say, you know what, here are all of these different things that I've done, and I'm actually proud of myself for doing them. So it's so interesting. It's like, interestingly enough, when it comes to the actual cheating, right, and I hate to use the word root cause, right? Because sort of in the woo culture, there's sort of a bunch of bullshit about root causes, where literally if you treat symptoms, it's enough, right? There's no such thing really for the most part in terms of like clinical kind of medical literature of root causes. In this case, there kind of is, if you call it a root cause. So it's like reframing that this person, that let's say person A is cheating on you, is usually not enough, right? Because what happens is that if you don't actually deal with the belief of I'm unlovable, I'm insignificant, I'm unworthy, then what's going to happen is after some time, these thoughts are going going to keep popping up, and maybe they'll even stop using the thought record because they'll go back to the thinking of, oh my god, this thought is so strong. No, maybe the thought record is crap. Maybe I've been wasting my time. So it's like, unless you deal with the quote-unquote root cause, right? I hate using this term of I'm unimportant, I'm insignificant, I'm unlovable, chances are it's going to keep popping up. So the point of this is, for you to get to that root cause, you have to first show them like, hey, you know what? It's actually unlikely that this person is cheating on you. Look at all of the evidence in front of you. Is it possible that maybe this says something about you than it does about them?
And also, then, if it does say something about you, which probably that's the most likely conclusion, then, I mean, what would you think about this as like a possible solution? Because, for instance, if you are thinking thoughts like that, would you argue, I mean, this is really a tough thing to say, would you argue you have too much time to think of things like that?
It's not
about, necessarily.
No,
right?
Here's the thing, people say that a lot of the times.
Like if you had some kind of like something you're really working on or something like that, maybe you wouldn't think.
So here's the thing though, but like what comes first though? So, or is it the fact that you feel like shit about yourself, that you're so depressed that you can't find a purpose or don't feel the need to, or don't feel like it's even possible for you? So I don't know which comes first, but the point is that essentially that it always, not always, I mean, I'd say that, but a lot of times it comes back to the person's self-esteem. So with delusional disorder and, you know, that jealous type, it literally, the people who have it are 99%, they have severely low self-esteem. They're incredibly insecure. So literally the accusation of cheating, barring like literally no, well, considering that, let's say there's no evidence, chances are obviously that it's coming from your own insecurities. And why are you insecure? Because obviously you feel unlovable. So the question is, and there's this sort of deep introspective period in therapy where you ask them, okay, why do you feel unlovable? The wonderful thing is sometimes they come up with really like shallow and crappy answers, and you could say that to them like, dude, like, do you really think that this makes you lovable? And they're like, no, but you know what? Like, my mom told me it did. And it's like, yeah, but your mom was an asshole. And they're like, you know what? Or my dad, whomever, right? And they're like, yeah, you know what? That actually makes sense. So then we go to a reframe of like, okay, so think about it like this, right? If let's say there's no such thing as human value, right? In any sort of philosophical sense, right? Where just value in itself just doesn't exist, right? So it's something that we create. So if you were to redefine value for yourself, right? What do you think should make a person valuable? And of course, this is dependent on society and, you know, things that we learned, obviously. This doesn't exist in a vacuum. So the person might say, you know what? So being kind makes me valuable, being a good person makes me valuable. Maybe not so much of being intelligent, because that's not something I can control, but being curious, right? Sort of being open-minded makes me valuable. And then they come up with all these values, right? And then I ask them, okay, so like in terms of the values that you meet now, right? Or the ones you're working towards, right? How many of them do you actually feel like, you know, are associated with you now? And they would say, shit, like at least 9 out of 10 or whatever that number is. And I'm like, so how does that make any possible sense? So here you have all of these different values, but you're saying you're not valuable or unlovable based on what and whose criteria. And they would say, well, you know, like my dad used to always say that I was stupid and I was ugly. And I would say, yeah, but the thing is, here's the thing, right? First of all, I mean, you can kind of look at the evidence and say you're not stupid, but then second of all, you even just admitted that being intelligent doesn't really have value, because it's something that you either have or you don't in terms of IQ, and it's not really fair to judge someone by it. So if you want, you can look at it one way where you could say like, oh, I'm not stupid because here are all of my accomplishments. Or you could look at it the other way and go even higher and say, you know what? I don't even care if I'm stupid or not, because it's not even like something to be proud of. People are just born or not born with high IQs, whatever that is, right? I mean, technically an IQ is an actual contract, so I mean, let's say whatever that is. But the point is essentially what the point of therapy is, to help them redefine themselves in the way that they want to be defined. And so remember last week we talked about having this core sense of self rather than being situational? That's what this is. It's being able to look at those qualities and say, hey, by the way, I'm not unlovable because I have A, B, C, D, E, right? And let's say in a hypothetical scenario, somebody still rejects you, right? Oh my God, how come they rejected me, right? Maybe you think it's possible that they're judging you by the standard your dad was judging you, right? Maybe they think you're supposed to be like super successful, super good looking, right? Famous, whatever it is. And I was like, but is that really something that should make a person feel proud of themselves? Or is it these other things that are actually much more difficult to attain? Because technically speaking, there are lots of famous people. There are not very many kind people. And that's literally the truth. I mean, like people who are consistently kind. I don't mean people who are kind once in a while. So I would ask them, like, what's more important, right? And sort of, this is not really off track, but I think this is a kind of pertinent and important quote. So Bobby Kennedy once said that moral courage is actually a rarer commodity than intelligence, and I agree with that. So there are lots of intelligent people, right? Honestly, so having a high IQ is not that big of a deal. And I would tell my kids this, like, in terms of therapy, like, they're like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. I'm like, dude, first of all, there are lots of smart kids. First of all, it doesn't even mean that they're going to be successful, number one. And number two is it's actually much harder to be a good person than it is to be a smart person. So if you want to be special, you're better off for working at that quality.
That's one, and then there's also, you know Howard Gardner, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the theory of multiple intelligences. Mm-hmm. There you go. So, for example, say it's not IQ, that's not where your strength lies, but perhaps you're kinesthetically intelligent. Perhaps musically you're intelligent. Right. Perhaps, you know, whatever. Haha. I can't think of another one. You know.
Well, they have spiritual. I don't even know what that means.
Is that really?
Yeah, that's a real. It's actually part of Gardner's theory. Spiritual.
Perhaps meditating.
Yeah.
Perhaps focus, attention.
I guess
like
I don't know. I don't know why he used the term spiritual, but I was like, okay, sure. But yes, there are a few of them.
You know what sucks? You know what I hate? I love enlightenment, but I hate the word enlightenment. I love spirituality, but I hate the word spirituality
because of the connotations it has.
It sucks because it's weird. It's like we need either a new word. We probably need a new word, because if you really looked up what these things mean, you're like, oh, it sounds good. Well, then because it's like associated with too many, I don't know, religious
new age concepts,
or new age, but in the sense of not the, because I'm sure there's some of them that are pretty authentic depending which one you're looking at. Depending, because for instance, say you're going into one that talks about different dimensions and something like that. Fair enough. We don't have the science. We're not there. We can't do that.
Theoretically, we can't string theory, but even still. Yeah.
But so, I agree. If somebody went there with that, fair enough.
So I do have a question for you.
Yes.
So this is going to obviously kind of be a bit off topic in terms of what we just talked about. So why do you think it's so hard for people to find love?
Because they're looking for it.
Ooh, what does that mean?
I want just to say cool answer.
Oh, show.
No.
You will find, but you must not look.
I mean, what is love? No, I'm kidding. That song popped up in my head. No, I mean, what's the question? How do you find love?
No. Why do you think it's so hard?
Why do you think it's so hard?
Love? What do you think?
Ego.
You think so, right?
That's one.
Oh, how so?
If, let's say, you have the belief that you're not good enough, you can already stop yourself from approaching and things like that. Say you even do approach, say you're just reactive in many ways in terms of little things that kind of just convey that you may be in your head. There you go. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Why else is it hard? Maybe because they think they have to look for it, like the first answer. Maybe you don't necessarily have to look for it. Maybe things are actually, maybe there's actually a paradigm where it's actually really easy and we overcomplicate the whole process. Right. Also, with the advent of social media and all this technology and all that, and all this stimulation, it could be kind of confusing the process a bit for people. It could have been much simpler before. Still hard, but simpler than it is now, because it's kind of a new reality to kind of navigate. What else? Why else is it really hard? Maybe some people think they're experts on it and they could talk about it. But they're really not. I'm joking, but but for real, why not? Yeah. Just to put the, because I'm not trying to come from this point of view.
We're definitely not experts on love.
You could talk about it.
We could definitely talk about it.
We're not experts. Just kidding. I'm an expert. No, I'm kidding. All right. So.
But no, I got you.
Why else? Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
I would even say fear of intimacy is a big one. And I think, interestingly enough, this is not something I have, let's say, data to back up, and this is kind of from my own anecdotal evidence, so just a warning. In terms of kind of it seems, right, from obviously people I've talked to, kind of in different sort of age groups, right, it seems, again, no data. So it seems to me that sort of back then, right before social media, and I don't know if social media is necessarily the culprit, but it's definitely a manifestation, that I think it was much easier for our grandparents and our parents to be intimate with each other. I'm not necessarily sure if that's the expectation or what, or the expectations they had for each other, but interestingly enough, right, it seems like the cycle went like this. Or not a cycle, or rather the sort of progression or digression went like this. So it started out with our parents and grandparents, and they're like, hey, like this is what I'm going through, and I'm able to share these vulnerabilities with you. And then when it came to us, right, and now with social media, where sort of all of the content that we put out is essentially curated perfectly, right? Now we're afraid to be vulnerable with one another. It's like if our Instagram page doesn't match up who we are and how we present ourselves, right? God forbid that's ever the case.
That's one. Mm-hmm. Two, I just thought of this. I can't believe I didn't think of this before. The fact that because we're used to getting everything like instant gratification, if something does not work out at the very sight of it, a lot of people may make the decision now as opposed to way back when to just drop that person, look for the next one, because it's so very easy to go on Tinder, that, whatever, such and such.
And that's the other thing. There's so many options, and I think that's also what makes it hard. So interestingly enough, and I think we might have talked about this. I know you definitely read about this in terms of making decisions. So what makes it so hard for us is that like we want the perfect choice. And so in terms of kind of strategizing in our brains, right, we're always sort of looking for the better option because we're like, oh, we want the perfect mate. And nothing like that is possible. So like the thing is, in terms of strategy, a lot of times you have to accept somebody who's good enough. Going back to Dan Savage in the Lovecast, right? He'll argue that there's no such thing as finding the one. That doesn't exist. You'd have to actually be content with the 0.74 out of 1. And he says, guess what, asshole? You're going to be there 0.74 because you're not perfect either, and that's okay. So a lot of times what we do is, you're right, I think it's a combination of factors. That first of all, we look for the instant connection, which we obviously cannot have because that's not possible. But then when we don't have it, then we're like, ooh, there are all these other options, let me go for them. And then we sort of go on this cycle and on this loop where we're just constantly looking and looking and looking and looking. And we're like, this person's not it, that person's not it, and then we're just trapped.
Also, one of the reasons, I don't know, again, why I didn't think of it when you asked the question, but a lot of times we think that we have to adhere to certain social, to certain societal standards. Again, like money, looks, things along those lines, social status in general. Thinking that you have to thinking that you have to adhere to that may actually impact you in a harmful way, because it'll put you kind of more in your head trying to get to this place, that place, instead of just kind of this kind of free expression. I'm not saying that that's better. But I'm sure you could definitely see where if you had all these variables in your mind that you have to kind of live up to, the moment you didn't, it would kind of, your self-esteem would sway, how you behave would sway. And for instance, in at least a man to woman relationship, she's looking at your behavior all the time. It's not like I found him attractive back then, so he's going to remain constantly attractive to me. Your attractiveness can change in an instant. So if you do base how you feel and your behavior on all these things that can change at an instant, that will affect your relationship. So if you could find some place where you're more steady in your behavior for a certain reason that you may behave steady, like more of a confidence, like a core confidence. That's probably better off. And the other thing I wanted to say is a lot of reasons why we might have issues with finding love is also a lack of empathy. You're actually not trying to find out or think about what is the other person feeling. And by really paying attention to what they're feeling and what they may be experiencing, that would lead to a more what is a good way of putting it? Like a more like servicing, like you service them, they service you relationship. I don't like the word service. It is what I mean.
When we said that last week too, right? Sort of when you just give yourself up to the other person, at least momentarily, essentially that you're experiencing that euphoria of transcendence where you're bonding with the other person. I actually like that. I really, really like that idea. So, and I think when it comes to possessive, and here's the other thing, by the way, about codependence. So it's also when, yes, it is obviously possessive, but time. So
no, it's just interesting. I actually didn't look at the time once. I was like, I could still go.
So interestingly enough, so even though it's sort of like codependence, well, not even though, it is obviously possessive, right? But the thing is, when it's possessive, right, the person doesn't actually care about the other person's feelings, obviously, and their own sort of mental well-being. They might say that they do, and they might really believe that they do, but they don't. So
they're concentrating on how they...
Yep. So that's where the accusations come from. That's where sort of the jealousy comes from, the verbal sort of abuse, maybe even sometimes physical abuse, especially when it comes to guys. They do this. I mean, this is no secret. And the point is that they're only thinking about about themselves. It's like, why aren't you showing me the love I deserve? That it's not like, oh wow, she's tired, she has other things to do, she's busy, she has goals, ambitions, God, she has other like fucking things in her life. It's always like me, 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 me. So there's no empathy, and there's obviously a sense of possession or desire to possess when you treat the person like an object.
Yeah, and it's important to, I mean, yes, you should have respect for yourself, you should think about yourself, sure, but in moderation, right? Caring about how the other person feels, it's also good, because when somebody else feels like you care about them genuinely, they would actually tend to either reciprocate or at least genuinely appreciate what it is that you're doing. You may have better interactions. For instance, say you did the proactive strategy, you're going out, all that, and you really were paying attention to how they're acting, how they're behaving. For instance, say you meet a girl, you grab her hand, right? It's not like a handshake, maybe like one of these, something like that. But then let's say she hesitates or something like that. Well, what do? You don't plow through and just keep holding her hand or something like that, or go with action. You're like, oh, you may apologize, actually. That shows social acuity and empathy. Because you'd be like, oh, that was strange. Now you look like somebody who understands what's going on. The other person feels understood as well. And they'll let you continue the interaction. Not let you, but you know what I'm saying. You'll end up having the interaction continue, for instance. That's just one case. But yeah, showing empathy is very important. It can actually influence how the entire interaction goes.
Oh, and I'll even give you an example of that, interestingly enough. And I'm like, the point of this is definitely not to sort of puff off my chest and say, oh, look how mature I am.
But it just puffed up.
I hear you. Because it's obviously because we're on radio or whatever podcast. But I mean, for me, this was a proud moment in my life. So there was this girl that I was like chatting with online. And I think it was probably like, when was this? Maybe about 2 years ago, right? And I think I told you guys the story today. So she was like, so she told me, so she flaked on me, right? So she completely flaked on me. But then she wrote me this really wonderful letter, right? And she was like, I'm really sorry, but I'm just not ready for a relationship. She's like, I really liked you, and I thought that, maybe it could have been something, but she's like, unfortunately, I'm not there. So obviously, I had kind of two choices. I could say, oh, fuck you, I don't want anything to do with you, you liar, you scumbag, whatever, right? So, but like, yeah. So honestly, and that's where the empathy sort of comes in. But like the other part of me was like, no, she was really honest with you, and a lot of people aren't. They just ghost you. And like, to be honest with you, as a quick side note, it's actually much more hurtful when they ghost you, because then you have no idea what's going on. So interestingly enough, so like I wrote her this letter back, and I was like thank you so much, like holy shit, like this was pretty amazing, like I hope whatever you're going through, you get through, because obviously it seems pretty important. So then like literally a year later, we got in touch with each other, and I was like, hey, how you doing? And then she's like, hey, like what's up? And I'm like, so like did everything work out okay? And then she's like, oh, like I'm still kind of scared, and I haven't really been with any, and she like really gave me this detailed story, and I was like, wow. And she's like I really haven't been with anybody exclusively, but like she's like, but I'm still like not looking for that, because this is the part she didn't tell me at first. She's like, actually, when I like started talking to you, she's like, I just broke off with like my fiance. And I was like, wow, like, so I completely understood. And she's like, yeah, like, and she's like, I wanted to date, but then I realized I wasn't ready. And then she's like, and even still, I'm not ready. So, and the reason why we didn't go out or anything was because she actually moved. So at the time when we talked, she was still living in New York, and then she like moved to Seattle. And I was like, okay, so this is not going to happen. So, but we ended off on good terms. Yeah,
because she was empathetic, and also you were empathetic back.
Right. And I think that's so. And here's the thing. And
so it's a great. Yeah. Sorry, actually, go ahead.
Well, I mean, here's the thing with empathy, and I know like our friend Liz makes a really good point where she says, and this happens a lot, like where it's hard for girls to like be honest with guys, because obviously they're really aggressive, and so it's hard for them to say, like, even if, so she says, and I definitely believe her, like when she's like, even when I'm nice to them and say like, hey, these are the reasons why I'm not interested, and they're like nothing hurtful, they'll still be like, oh, you bitch, like how dare you, whatever, like that I absolutely get. So I think so I think it's sort of different, obviously, so for this girl, technically speaking, she could have like ghosted me and said like, oh, there's a good chance that he'll do the same thing. I don't know why she didn't. That was obviously grateful she didn't, but I think that also like that kind of factors in the sense.
Could it be that she's cool?
Yeah.
Can you believe it? There's actually cool people out there.
But then again,
it's one of those weird examples.
Right.
You're like, whoa, one of the many.
But then again, she also took a risk.
One of the few.
Well, she took a risk, and I think that that's really important because a lot of times the girls who don't do that, and this is something that I had to learn because I was pretty hurt by the times I was ghosted. But what I had to learn was that a lot of times they ghost me because A, they don't know me, B, they're fearing my reaction. Not personal, because A, they don't know me. So I get why they don't do it, but I really do like when we can actually have these conversations with each other, especially because like she didn't owe me that. That was the thing. Like I actually never believed that she owed me that explanation. I don't know her, number one. Number two, even if I did, she could do whatever she wants. But the fact that she gave that to me, I was like, wow, holy shit, this is so cool. That would have been such a good relationship, man. If that ever worked out, my God. Oh, and by the way, she was a PhD student and fucking brilliant. So when I pictured us together, I was like, oh my God.
So there's another thing I'll say. This is not very PC, but a friend said this to me one time after I had a breakup. And it was the most strangely profound thing I've ever heard. He said, sometimes, you know, when you guys break up, sometimes it's not your fault. Sometimes she's just fucking dumb. And I was like, wait, what? He's like, sometimes she's just fucking dumb. And I said, like, what do you, like, why'd you, huh?
Right.
And then I was like, and I was trying to see what he's saying.
Right,
because
right.
I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah,
are you just, like, insulting her and just saying that? Are you just being helpful to me or what? And he's like, no, I mean, really, like, what if her perception is just not, like, for instance, for how you behave, what if, like look at her behaviors. For instance, she was somebody who didn't have the best behaviors, was just home a lot, didn't work, didn't take care of herself very well.
So she was depressed?
No.
Kind of
maybe,
like, yeah,
perhaps.
It kind of
I don't know.
Like it.
She didn't seem that way before, but then, like, when you, like, break it down, I was just like, huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, but long story short, by the way, the person that I'm talking about, it's not talking about the girl that I was with.
Okay.
It's talking about the girl that he was referencing as an example for me.
Right.
Yeah. The person I was with was still actually very cool, and I'm still friends with them to this day.
Right.
I'm not trying to say anything.
No.
But that thing he said, though, I was just like, huh. Yeah. What if she's just like? What if we don't meet at the same place, you know? Like, what if just whatever my characteristics are and her characteristics are just don't mix? Or what if just her perception is off? What if my perception is off too? And you have to think of that as well. I think it is important to consider all the options here.
Right.
But that was interesting because usually I never go to that. I never think like, oh yeah, what if they're just...
Right.
What if they're just not thinking right? Like, and then also, what if I'm not thinking right? That's the first.
And then also,
think, yeah.
Here's the other thing. Interestingly enough, so you know what studies actually also show? So in terms of like, obviously I can't know if this was the case with you, but here's why I'm making this point. So what studies actually show is that sometimes, right, this actually, what studies show is this happens actually with like the same sex, but I can imagine that this would transfer over to the opposite as well. So interestingly enough, let's say you're two different, kind of people in the room, right? So one is a perspective, let's say they're an interviewer, prospective employer, and the other person is a prospective employee. So interestingly enough, when it comes to the same sex with men and women, when the resume is sort of threatening to the potential employer, where it's like, whoa, like this person has accomplished so much, and like objectively speaking, like you can see that what they actually do is they devalue the potential employee and they say, they're not that great because of X, Y, and Z. So interestingly enough, because our self-esteem is so fragile, and I literally mean this sort of globally, I don't just mean like for particular people, I mean for all of us to some extent. So because our self-esteem is so fragile, sometimes we meet people who we believe to some extent or some deep level are really great, but because we don't believe we can have them, we kind of devalue them in our minds. And I think when going back to what I said earlier, when I used to make those shitty jokes and asshole jokes about to the girl, right? Essentially, I was doing that, and I don't even think I was doing it consciously to think back at it. I think I literally felt that about the person. And now that I'm only obviously able to think back at it, I think the reason why I was devaluing them is because I was like, wow, like they're so great. There's no way that she would ever want to be with me. So I'm like, let me just sort of, and this again, unconscious, right? So let me just kind of put her down to either bring her down to my level or make her feel
the
inferior.
Confidence preservation.
Right.
Yeah, so for instance, that is very important too. You really do need to think of it from all angles.
Right, so she could just be dumb. I mean, technically speaking, right? It could be that maybe she felt like...
Or also to the point that you're saying, I could just be for instance, I could just be going with that.
Right.
For instance, like let's say I hear it and it's appealing. It's like light bulb. Haha, this is great. It could actually be true. But on the other side, what if I'm rationalizing or just putting her down to maintain my confidence?
So that depends on the evidence, obviously.
That's one. And then two, actually, it is interesting to consider what is the most useful for you. For instance, if you were to think, like, that's very interesting, because why would you want to maintain your confidence from an evolutionary perspective?
Right.
Because it could affect other things in your life. You need to maintain your confidence. And but if you want to base things on truth, you really do need to think of it from multiple perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, man. We're like an hour and a half. All right, Alan. Final thoughts? What do we have for the audience before we go? On love.
Love. If you're gonna love somebody. This is gonna sound so cheesy. Well, I was gonna say you're gonna love authentically. Yeah. No, but that's
actually, yes, I would agree with that.
No, it's a real statement. I just the word authentic carries so many.
Well, love with intimacy, like literally be honest and vulnerable with your partner, right?
Yeah. Like try to be really empathetic, really care like what the other person is thinking, what they're feeling. A demonstration of that shows them that you have some kind of social acuity, and like you kind of read them and understand them. And when somebody feels understood, they're more likely to kind of let their guard down with you, and kind of allow for maybe a relationship to kind of grow from that. Yeah. That's like one thought. Another thought is don't let your ego get in the way. Again, we've talked about the ego several times before in the podcast. If you could identify the times that you're identifying it being kind of like your own worst enemy in terms of love and relationships, it's definitely good to like recognize when that is. This way you don't do it in the future. There's actually a million different things I could say. Yeah. Certainty is important, like just being really confident in what you're saying tends to actually help you out in terms of relationships. Yeah. I think
more. Yeah, there's a lot more. There's a lot more. I think also in terms of being indecisive, I think a lot of the times, man, we got to just accept the fact that we're gonna find a 0.74, and then that's okay because we're 0.74s ourselves. So the thing is, like, look, man, sometimes
0.75.
Oh,
0.75. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
So the point is essentially that if you find someone good, really try your best to hang on to them, because there actually isn't a good chance that you'll find somebody to you that's going to be a 0.74 again, because that's actually not that high of a match if you think about kind of correlation. So if you think about like your standard, whatever that is probably super high because like you're a person, and whatever if they're meeting even a 0.7 of that standard, I think that's pretty fucking amazing. So
and another final thought.
Shoot.
Also, approach, go out, take action. Prove to yourself that rejection won't kill you. It doesn't matter. It'll make you grow in from taking that kind of action and being more proactive. You'll actually find someone who is I know you said that we could settle for 0.74s and all that, but you could find someone who's internally your
0.74. You're 0.74.
I would say you're really fair enough.
God,
fair enough. You're 0.74.
You're my 0.74.
Yeah, you could definitely find that. And if you want to follow us and check out more of our episodes, follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on YouTube, and remember to click the bell and subscribe. Follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Instagram and at Seize_podcast on Twitter.
Yes.
Also look out for us on O4LOnline.com/Seize the Moment.
It's technically O4LOnlineNetwork.com/Seize the Moment Podcast. And I also want to give a huge shout out to the staff members at O4L Online. So number one, the guy who takes care of all of our media content, who's like the fucking king of media, literally. Vegas, yes. So you can follow Vegas on Instagram at Vegas Media Designs, and also our guy Andy. So Andy also does a hell of a job at O4L. So he covers different types of interviews, where he interviewed Angie Thomas, who wrote the Hate You Give novel. Yeah, so he he interviews a bunch of people who have to do with like the music industry, who had like interactions and relationships with Tupac. And so, I mean, he does a hell of a job promoting our stuff at Part 2. And so you can find him at Andy O'Farrell. You can find him on Twitter. You can find him on Instagram. And God knows where else he could be, because he's also kind of all over the place like Vegas. You could probably find him on a few different platforms. Definitely O'Farrell Online Network. And so just to end off with a question, right, sort of for you guys, to hope that some of you guys would comment and kind of interact with us and give us some of your feedback. So I would want to know, like, when did you experience love and what was that like? And if you ever had any heartbreak, how did you deal with it? And particularly, how did you deal with rejection?
Also, if you want, the question he asked me earlier too, why do you think some people have trouble finding love?
Yeah.
All right. So, guys, remember to seize the moment and have a great day.